when I was 7 years old, my father died suddenly, unexpectedly. He was a doctor. I thought, hey, I should be a doctor too. That's going to solve all of life's cosmic problems. And so I worked my butt off and I became a doctor, and it was supposed to make me happy. And I quickly found out that it didn't necessarily bring all the joy and happiness and purpose that I thought it would be. It was the only identity I ever knew. But I started getting tired and exhausted, and it didn't feel as good. So I started looking for a way out, and that's how I discovered financial independence. I was lucky enough to get a phone call from Jim Daly, the White Coat Investor. He's written extensively about physicians and finances, and I had a medical blog at the time, and he wanted me to review his book. I read his book. It changed my life. I'm like, wow, I'm financially independent already. I can leave work. But instead of being excited, that gave me a panic attack because I had no idea who I wanted to be. So instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I decreased my activities as being a physician bit by bit. I call it the art of subtraction. I was left with the one thing I loved, which was hospice work. But I only had to do that 10 or 15 hours a week. So I did a bunch of other things, including writing about personal finance, podcasting. That's how I met you fellas. And when I had all these impressive people like you guys on my show, we'd be talking about entrepreneurship and financial independence, and I'd be talking to authors about their books. But a lot of time we were really good at talking about how do we get to this place of wealth, but we didn't often know what to do with it. Or what did that mean to our future? Or what does it mean once you have enough money? What does enough really look like? And strangely enough, I found those kind of answers from my hospice patients. I was still doing hospice medicine, the terminally ill. They were talking about their regrets. And I'm like, that could teach us a lot about money. I wrote a book called Taking Stock, which was about what the dying could teach us about money. A big part of that book was talking about purpose. And after I started marketing that book and going to conferences and talking to people about purpose and how it relates to money, I got something I never expected. A lot of people looked at me and said, Doc, I have no idea what purpose is in my life. And in fact, it's making me really anxious. Please stop asking me to find my purpose. And that became my second book, The Purpose Code.
Well, I'm super excited for this conversation because while there's a lot of conversations in the personal finance space around numbers, we can all sit there and argue until we're blue in the face about, is it 3% safe withdrawal rate, 3.5%, 4%? I think most of us have been doing this long enough to know that that part is honestly the easy part. It's the mental part that is it's a lot more difficult. And it's also just so much more interesting to me to have these kind of conversations. These, I love the kind of stoicism type books, the Ryan Holiday books, and Doc, I feel like you have the best conversations in that kind of space. And first, I just kind of wanted like a blanket statement of what a cool perspective to be able to lean into as far as getting these conversations with people in hospice, because I think a lot about, kind of the timeline that I'm on and my expiration date. And I'm always trying to maximize the most out of life. And I even think about how sometimes one of the biggest pushbacks against like financial independence is this like YOLO mentality, like, hey, you only live once, like why are you stashing all this money away and having this delayed gratification? When to me, I think if you're doing this path the right way, like you're very conscious of the fact that you only live once and you don't want to give away all those years to someone. And so that's a long-winded, just kind of like, man, I'm excited for this conversation. But you kind of briefly mentioned the first book, Taking Stock. I know we're going to jump into the new one, The Purpose Code. I thought maybe for listeners, this could be helpful to draw us a little bit of a Venn diagram of what was different about the first book than the second book, or like what was it after the first book that made you think this is the missing piece that now I want to cover? Do they need to be read in order? That sort of thing.
So here's what happened. Basically, I wrote Taking Stock on three major premises, right? The first premise is that we need to define a sense of purpose, identity, and connections first. The second premise was once we had that sense of purpose, identity, and connections, we can build a financial framework around it, right? Our money is supposed to serve us becoming the people we want to become. And last but not least was that difficult question that you were even talking about is, okay, fine. I have my sense of purpose, identity, and connections. I'm building this path towards financial independence, but how do I know whether to spend today? Because you only live once, and hey, you could be like my father who died at the age of 40, or should I defer gratification for tomorrow? Because hey, we might live into our 80s and 90s and we want to have enough money to enjoy that. And so the last premise is we have to ask ourselves an important question. What scares us most? This idea that we're going to die young and rich and never get to enjoy ourselves, or this idea that we're going to live to a ripe old age and run out of money. And since we don't know exactly when we're going to die, we can use that question to start figuring out where we fall on the YOLO deferred gratification continuum. So for a lot of us, we might say, hey, I'm worried about dying young, so you really want to spend a lot more money on YOLO and save a smaller percentage, versus vice versa. Like me, I was always like, I'm going to live to a long old age and I want to make sure I have enough money to manage that. Well, then I'm probably going to save a lot more, put it more towards retirement. Maybe only 10% of my extra money I'll use towards YOLO. So that was the kind of premise of the first book. But as I was saying, I would go to these conferences, and at the end of giving my talk about taking stock, someone would come up to me, and instead of having a big smile on their face, they'd look kind of angry. And this happened over and over again. And it all came down to, hey, it's really easy to say put purpose first, but most of us don't even know what purpose is. And in fact, it makes us feel bad about ourselves. And so that sent me really down the rabbit hole of doing some research, like what is purpose and is it important or not? And what I found is that there are so many great studies that show that having a sense of purpose in life leads to increased longevity, health, and happiness. Like, this is really well studied. There's almost no question. On the other hand, other studies show that 91% of people at some point in their life have something called purpose anxiety, where purpose just makes them feel bad and depressed and down. And so to me, that felt like a big paradox. And so I wrote this book, The Purpose Code, to answer that paradox, to say, hey, we probably look at purpose wrong. It's probably not one thing, but two things. And one of those things is probably really good for us and is associated with that health, longevity, and happiness. And the other is probably associated with anxiety. And you know what? Society often pushes us towards the anxiety version of purpose. And that's why people generally feel lost. So the second book definitely flowed from the first. And if I was going to say, hey, if you're going to read them both, start with Taking Stock and move on to The Purpose Code.
Now that you've been digging into this topic so much more, do you have some prescriptive advice on how to find purpose? Because I think purpose is one of those amorphous words that just people don't even really know what it means. Like, people just kind of assign a definition of purpose and what matters to them, but nobody actually goes through the steps to figure out what that is. So as someone who's been digging hardcore into this stuff for the past couple of years, do you have like a prescriptive or a tactical guidebook to get there?
So definitely I go through the steps in The Purpose Code, but I'd say a few things first. First of all, I don't think we find purpose. And I think that's one of the things that makes people miserable, because they're like, there's this one big thing that I'm supposed to find, and I've looked all over the place and it's not there. I think we actually have more agency. I think we build or create purpose. Now, it is true. If you want to build or create purpose, you have to do it around something. So I think we have these inklings or these beckonings of things that might be important to us, and I call those purpose anchors. And so there's some really very clear ways to find purpose anchors, which I talk in the book. But before I mention those, I should really talk about the fact that part of the problem with purpose and the reason why it seems so high stakes is that we often get purpose wrong. And as I was saying, there are probably two versions of purpose. The one that most of us have been led to believe is the important version of purpose is what I call big P purpose. It's this big, audacious, goal-oriented purpose. You know, in the lingo, people are like, it's when you're killing it, right? When you're trying to become a billionaire, when you're building that 7-figure business, when you're going into politics because you one day want to be president, when you're working towards being an astronaut. And in popular culture, we think that's like a really, really positive thing. But in reality, only a very few small percentage of people get to those big, audacious goals. So what we're really talking about is scarcity. You have to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with the right genetics, and you need a heck of a lot of luck. Because if you don't have all that, you're not going to become president, right? So the real question is, over what we think purpose is supposed to be, a lot of times we don't have nearly as much agency as we pretend like we do. And so that's what leads to all that anxiety. On the other hand, I love this version of purpose of what I call little p purpose. Now, little p purpose is very process oriented. So we drop all the goals. We're not worried about getting to some big goal. What are the things you could do that light you up? And so as opposed to be scarcity mindset oriented, this is really abundant, because if we think about it, there could be millions of things we could like doing. And most of these things aren't failable. Like, you do them, and if you love it and you enjoy it, it's great. And if you don't love it and enjoy it, you do something else. So as opposed to being all or nothing, it's all or all. There's almost no way to lose. And so, like, for instance, I'll give a great example. For me, podcasting is little p purpose. yes, I could put big audacious goals on it, like I want 1 million downloads a month, and I may or may not get there, but it's going to take a lot of factors, some of which I have control over and some of which I don't. On the other hand, I love just getting in front of the mic, and every time I go to interview someone, those hour or two that I spend doing that is incredibly joyful, regardless of what happens with that episode, regardless if anyone listens to it. So for me, podcasting is Little P Purpose. So with that framework, then you say, well, how do I come across these versions of purpose in my life? You look for purpose anchors. And there's a series of steps I talk about in the book. One of them is the life review, which I actually talk about in Taking Stock, this idea that the dying do this process of asking themselves questions to rehash their life and come to some peace with it. But the living often don't ask as many difficult questions. So a big one is, what would you regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? When you're dying, regret feels really bad because it's a disappointment. You can't fix it. But when you're young and healthy, regret is just another name for a purpose anchor. So the regrets of the dying is a great way to start thinking about your own purpose anchors to build purpose around. The joys of childhood is another one. Often we remember the things we loved as a kid, but eventually as we get older, we're told that the kid stuff we have to put aside so that we can enter corporate America or become doctors or lawyers or accountants or do all those kind of adult things. And we let go of some very purposeful things in our lives. I also talk about in the book, Taking Stock, the art of subtraction. So that's kind of the third way we can look for purpose anchors. If you take your job and you hate it and you get rid of all the things you hate about your job, is there a kernel of something you like? So for me, I wasn't enjoying being a doctor, but the one part I really did like was hospice work. So when I subtracted everything else out, it was the one thing I would do even if I wasn't being paid for it. So those are 3 good ways to start finding those purpose anchors to build a life purpose around. The last one I'll mention is just my favorite, because if you have really no idea, you try the spaghetti method, right? You throw a bunch of things up against the wall, see what sticks. So that's like doing activities you normally wouldn't do, hanging out with people you normally wouldn't hang out with, exposing yourself to experiences maybe that frighten you a little bit, and see if anything feels good. And if it does, you then pursue those things. So those are some good ways to start thinking about how you encounter these purpose anchors. But again, purpose is active. It's not passive. You have to build or create that life.
So going back to the YOLO delayed gratification continuum that we talked about, we should make that a t-shirt, Doc G.
I think I should.
That's a good one. But going back to that continuum, I think a lot of people, given the conversation we're having today, they're like, okay, well, I want to have as many experiences as humanly possible. So that puts them on the very edge of the YOLO side of this continuum. That might be going on way more vacations than they can afford. They might be going out to eat and going to the bars with friends 4 or 5 nights a week because they just want as many quote unquote experiences as they can possibly get. How do you think about, on a tactical level, rationalizing like how many of those experiences you should and you can do?
All right, let's talk about another continuum.
Okay.
And I call this the cheap thrills continuum, right? And so we're talking about, on one side, you have cheap thrills, and on the other, you have enduring, lasting happiness and contentment, right? So what is cheap thrills? We all in our community realize spending money on stuff often is cheap thrills. Like you buy that shiny object and you really love it, but then you hedonically adapt and it becomes normal in your life and you're no happier a few months later, right? So we know spending money on happiness is cheap thrills. So here's where I get controversial. Here's where I get very anti-die with zero. I think experiences are a little bit better, but also cheap thrills. And there's always more experiences you can do. And if experiences are your thing, you're going to never have enough because there's always a new place, a new thing to do. But the truth of the matter is, what I think is happiness and contentment, it isn't things and isn't experiences. It's becoming the person you want to be. And so the things you buy and the experiences you do are a reflection of being that person you want to be, especially if you're aligned. But I think we spend way too much time worrying about the experiences. And this is why I don't love bucket lists either. It's like my bucket list is to go to Greece and hang out on the Greek Isles and spend a month there. Well, that's great. But that's 1 month of your life and it's gone. I'd rather focus on things like, I want to be an adventurous soul who takes mini breaks and likes to explore the world. You don't got to go to Greece to do that. If you happen to have the money and hey, have the time, wonderful. But you can do that in your backyard too. So I often talk about that other continuum of becoming the person you want to be, as opposed to worrying about whether I hit that experience or another experience. Because like I said, there's always going to be a new place to go. no matter how wonderful your family and friends are and the parties you have and the things you do are, there's always going to be more of those. And so that causes its own sort of treadmill. And we get stuck with, well, what's enough? Well, it's never enough because I could always have a new experience. So I'd rather focus on all of us becoming the people we want to be who spend our lives doing purposeful activities. And so if you think about your life, between today and the day you die, there's a set amount of time and you have almost no control over it. You can't buy or sell time. You can't trade it. All you can do is control the activities you do during that time period. So I'd like to help people add in as many purposeful, exciting activities that make more concrete in them being the person they want to be and getting rid of as much stuff that they loathe. And so some days that is going to be doing that big experience, but most of the time it's going to be doing those daily activities that make you more who you want to be.
Yeah, I like the way of looking at that at more of the true root of, like, you want to be a adventurous person. You want to, you want to have that kind of, like you said, becoming that person versus just like, oh, I'm going to go on this very specific trip. And it actually makes me think of the way I think a lot of the people that I resonate with in the personal finance space think about like all forms of spending, whether it's even if it is going on a trip. Like, I want to see this beautiful ocean, or I want to relax, I want to scuba dive and see this, whatever. Like, and if I focus on that and like what it takes to build that trip, it's different than if I think, well, I've got to get like a 5-star hotel and whatever because it's got to be luxurious. It's like, well, is that really what you're trying to get out of the trip? Are you trying to get out this luxurious fancy thing, or are you trying to do what you said you want to do, which is like view the ocean, go on that hike, which don't cost really anything? And so and same thing with lots of objects and things that we do in our buy in our lives. Like, even if it's going out to eat, like we could, what you really want is you want time maybe with your partner or with a friend to have a nice conversation, to get out of the house, to experience a new flavor. You don't really have to order like 3 things and have the cocktails and run up the bar tab. Like, there's, it's this mentality of thinking like, what are you really trying to get out of it? I'm curious, as a little bit of a swap from that though, is, when you're getting to talk to people in hospice, like these people who are at the end of their lives and they're looking back on the, the big P, the little P's, was there anything that surprised you that you would see as a common theme? Like, I'm sure there's people who are like, I wish I spent, more time with my parents or my children, or, some things like that. But was there anything that stuck out to you where people maybe saw that they knew that there was all these little P's that they kind of squandered?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, really common. And remember, it's different for every person because I think deep down inside, we all have different wants, concerns, and excitements, different things that light us up. Like, for me, it's a pretty common one, but writing lights me up. And so that, for me, if I was on my deathbed and I'd never traditionally published a book, that would have been one of those little P's that I had ignored. Society tells us that purpose is supposed to be the 6-pack abs, the nice clothes, the extensive travel, and the 7-figure business. So society tries to funnel us all into the same places because a lot of times society is made up of influencers and marketers and business people who want to make money on us. But when you get down to people's deathbed regrets, it's almost never those things that society has pushed on us. It's their unique interests and joys, which can be different for every person. For one person, it's collecting coins and they wish they spent more time enjoying that because that was really great for them. For other people, it was the people they wanted to be with. For other people, it's developing the skill. I will tell you the one thing that surprises me over and over and over again is it's not whether you succeed or fail, it's whether you put the precious time and energy into doing that thing that mattered to you. And so that surprised me because I could see a lot of people at their deathbed saying, I had this dream, for instance, from my previous book, of climbing Mount Everest, and I tried and I never got there. That's not what people complain about. It's whether I had the courage to actually try, that I took the time, energy, courage. I stepped away from what I was doing and I put myself out there and did the difficult thing. And so I've been speaking a lot about the arena speech, which I think is very played out because we all talk about the arena speech, but part of it is it's so good. You want to be in the arena fighting the good fight. You want to be bloodied and battered. And that's how life is supposed to be. And so when people are on their deathbed and they never set foot in the arena, that's when they feel huge regret. They don't feel regret that they got beat in the arena. They don't feel regret that they gave it their all and it just wasn't good enough. They feel really sad that they never stepped into the arena.
Yeah, wondering what could have happened eats at you a lot more than knowing what did happen, even if it was a bad result. That's very true.
And it gets back to this fact that our fights, those are all about becoming the person we want to be. And so again, things are great when you buy them in order to add to being the person you are, right? If you buy running shoes, it doesn't make you a runner. But if you run and you enjoy running more on a certain type of running shoe and then buy it, that purchase actually helps create and enhance you being the person you want to be. Same with experiences. Like experiences, when done right, help make more concrete in you that identity and purpose that are important. And so same with your fight. It doesn't matter if you succeed or you fail, but the types of fights you choose will help you become the person you want to be.
So the arena in the context of financial independence, and what we talk about in this podcast all the time, a lot of people will say, nose to the grindstone for 10, 15, 20 years, hit that financial independence number, then you can go and pursue whatever you want. I know, Doc G, we've actually butted heads on this a little bit before, where I'm like, no, you don't need to do any nose to the grindstone at all. Some other people are like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Have you found a sweet spot for this, or what do you recommend people do in the financial context? I get what you're saying. Like, you want to be bloodied and you want to be in the arena doing the thing, but there's a point where maybe you were like, I was in the arena for 10 years. I hit this financial independence thing, but all those years in the arena, like, I never got to pursue that passion, that purposeful thing, that little P. I never got a chance to do that because my head was just buried in the work trying to hit this audacious financial goal.
Let me say, first of all, Cody, that I've definitely moved towards your wise input on this earlier on.
Thank you.
You and I have had these conversations back to 2018, 2019. And in fact, you were one of the people who really kind of confronted me on specifically that idea and made me rethink a lot of what I was considering. So the way I'd put it is this. I think it is fine to be very intentional and front load the sacrifice as long as you're very intentional about how that is eventually going to support your purpose, identity, and connections. But it's very easy to see how life is short and unpredictable. And if you spend too much time doing that and put everything off, you may at one day be on your deathbed and never have actually done these things. And so what I think we've all grown up to see, especially in the financial independence movement, which has evolved quite a bit, even in the last 5-10 years, is that the money is supposed to really support the purpose and identity, the you becoming the person you should be. And there's just no reason that you should have to put that off for long periods of time. We should be savvy enough to really build that financial framework around those things that are important to us and start integrating them much earlier. So I think if you're very intentional, you can very intentionally front load the sacrifice. But I would warn that, putting everything aside completely and doing that for too long can be very dangerous. I think the newer versions, the slow fi, the coast fi, the lifestyle design are much better versions of how we can become ourselves today, as well as build a stable financial framework.
A word that keeps coming to my mind with a lot of the conversations we're having is just reflection. Like when you talk about, thinking about what lights you up, I think it's funny. Almost every time I've spoke to a group of people, if I ask people to kind of name out things that make them happy, I get these similar responses. It's like we all know it, but we don't sit down and kind of reflect on when we had a really good day, or look back on the week and what were our good days and bad days and what were those common themes. I think all the information is there. I think we actually know what it is.
Yes.
We just kind of run right past. And then with the, the conversation about kind of nose to the grindstone, I do think that method can absolutely work, of where that, hey, I've got this skill set that I can eke a lot of money out. It doesn't necessarily brighten me up, but it makes a lot of money. I can hit this hard for 4 or 5 years, and then I can live the life I want. But the problem is that we lose sight of where we're going, and we get stuck in it, and we don't stop back and keep ourselves honest on why we're doing this, and that we don't let our lifestyle creep up with it, and then we get off path because we're not stopping and reflecting. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on recommendations, practices, just your general thoughts on how we kind of slow down and see the information that's so blatantly right there in front of us and not lose sight of everything.
Here's the problem. The problem is most people who are grinding it out and looking at some net worth number of financial independence as the answer aren't sitting there rationally saying, I'm going to be intentional because XYZ is really important to me and my sense of purpose and identity. And I'm just going to do this for 5 or 10 years and then I'm in it. What actually mostly happens is people haven't thought about who they want to be or what do they want to do in the world. And so they end up grinding it out because that becomes the goal and the purpose. And so it becomes a mirage that helps them not think about the deeper, more important work. And the deeper, more important work is not how do I make money? The deeper, more important work is how do I become the best version of me that's doing things that are deeply important to me? And a lot of people don't want to do that really, really hard work. And I agree with you 100%. One thing I've learned is, so I give people all these exercises to find their purpose anchors. We talked about the life review and the joys of childhood and the art of subtraction, the spaghetti method. But you're 100% right. When you take people, you put them in a quiet room and you say, close your eyes. What is your deepest yearning? The thing that you never tell anyone else, but you dream about. The last thought in your mind before you fall asleep. The thing that you don't have the courage to talk about because it scares the heck out of you. And most people have something there. And it's funny. And you might say, okay, it's being an astronaut. And being an astronaut, okay, that is a big, audacious goal. And most likely you're not going to succeed. But if being an astronaut is that deep thing that you always dream about, you might not become an astronaut, but why the heck aren't you doing a podcast about it, writing a blog about it, interviewing astronauts? Why aren't you going and taking classes to learn about jet propulsion? Like, why aren't you joining the NASA fan group? Like, all of these wonderful versions of purpose that you could build around that anchor. And we don't tend to do it. And most of us know this to be true. So even the people I know who've been most resistant to be like, I have no idea what purpose is. Most of them, when they're being honest with themselves, there's these kind of deep yearnings. And we're petrified that if we try doing it, we might fail or what it's going to mean.
Something that I've always struggled with, and I love the concepts that we're talking about today, like don't be the person who just wants to go to Greece for a month, become an adventurous person. Don't be the person who just wants a six-pack, become the person who works out on a daily basis. Don't be the person who is going to eat healthy for a month, become a healthy eater for life. But how do you balance that with celebrating milestones? So let's say you do want to hit some financial goals and you do want to become a saver. You do want to become someone who spends intentionally. You do want to become someone who works out on a regular basis. But as you naturally hit those milestones, when you become that type of person, like how do you balance the celebration of those milestones, but not getting so excited that like that's the end of the journey?
So I always say little p purpose is goal agnostic, but not goal phobic. And so I think it's wonderful to have goals. But your enjoyment and your sense of purpose, and you can't be just doing that thing to hit goals. So again, let's come back to podcasting. I would love to have 1 million downloads every month. And I could even set that as a goal, and dare I say a big audacious goal. But if it gets to the point where I don't enjoy making the podcast, or I feel beat up when I'm making headway but not getting there, or I start dreading the activities I have to do in order to make it to that goal, then I've kind of lost my wind. It's no longer little p purpose. On the other hand, if I say, I want to make it to 1 million downloads, but I love getting in front of the microphone, even if I fail. And I have agency to do some things that'll make my podcast better. So there's little incremental steps, but they're ones I can control, right? I can go listen to some of the best interviewers and listen to their podcasts and take note. I can do one extra social media post a week, and that might help me with some followers. And if I like doing it or if I enjoy the interaction, then that's great. And so I don't think we have to be afraid of goals. But if the goal is the point of the activity, then you're probably going to find the fact that if you don't enjoy the process, remember, you spend 95% of your time in process and only 5% of your time in true achievement. So even when you reach the goal, it's very short acting. And we know that because of hedonic adaptation, things that feel unreachable or even fantastic lose their shimmer very quickly. So ask any Super Bowl champion, and they will tell you that winning the Super Bowl was the greatest day of their life. And then the next day or the day after that, they're already thinking about winning the next one or being the MVP for the year. Like they don't just stop and be like, I've done it. I'm done. I'm happy. I'm there. And so if you don't enjoy playing football, even if you do win the Super Bowl championship, that joy is going to be short. And then you have to go back to process, which is showing up every day, practicing, hanging out with the same people, and doing the hard work. And so if you don't enjoy that hard work, I think you're not spending your time well. And time is precious. That's all we got.
Yeah. Yeah. The example that, I mean, from my own life that I think about is, when I graduated college, I was going through Air Force RTC at the same time. So I graduated and commissioned in the Air Force on the same day. I got the location that I wanted, had always wanted to go out west and live in the mountains. So I'm in Colorado. At the time, I'm making like $40-something thousand a year, which to me was a ton of money. So I've got like cash flow coming in. I've commissioned. I got my computer engineering degree. Like, I feel like I've hit all these goals, and I hit them like all at the same time. Like they just all kind of flooded in. But then I stood there, and for the first time in my life, was like truly depressed because I had no other
which is
goals.
so
I didn't have
counterintuitive.
the next domino. I didn't have, And so I know for me, the two things that I did was, one, I was like, well, if I'm depressed, and I don't know what to do, I'm just going to go like figure out a way to like help other people and use my energy for good somewhere to make somebody else happy if I can't make myself happy. And then the other thing I did was I started trying to just reverse engineer, like, okay, what does make me happy? And I go through that, and I end up with, I think what most people do is a list of things that actually don't cost any money, but they do cost a lot of time. Like you said, like time is the biggest resource, but they also don't make money. These things that came to me that I really enjoyed. And so I knew for me, that's kind of what led me to wanting to go after financial independence in the first place, is I needed a way to get the job out of the way of happiness. And so I would love to hear, I know we've talked a little bit about some of these like exercises that people could do, but maybe like if they feel not just in a confused place, not just they're not sure what their purpose is, but maybe they're in a really negative place. Like some of the mental exercises that you could recommend, or questions, or just exercises they could work through to try to start to give them a little direction and get a foot going in the right direction.
So let me tell you what I think about that, which may or may not answer your question. I think happiness has two components. I think happiness is meaning and purpose. And a lot of people confuse them or don't know the difference or interchange them. So let me explain what my version of meaning or purpose are and why you need both of them for happiness. And that'll help us answer the question you just asked. Meaning is all about thoughts. It's about the past, and specifically, it's how we think about our past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Happy people tend to feel a sense of meaning in which they were a hero, so they tell themselves a hero story. Not that they didn't face horrible things and trauma and difficulty, but they see that they got through those and see themselves as a better person today. Unhappy people tell themselves victim stories, that they were trying to accomplish something and their trauma and everything else got in the way and it wasn't fair. And therefore, in the present, they feel like the same things will continue happening. They've always been thwarted. They've always been a victim, and they continue to tell themselves a victim story. That's meaning. Meaning is about thoughts and the past. Purpose is about present and future, and it has nothing to do with thoughts. It's all about actions. So purpose are the things we do in the present and future that fill us up. To be happy, you need both. You need meaning and purpose. To the people who really feel thwarted, unhappy, upset, and don't know where to find purpose, most of the problem actually is probably not even a purpose problem, because purpose is about actions, not thoughts, and it's about present and future. It's probably more a meaning issue. They feel lost and out of control, and in essence, not enough, because the stories they're telling themselves about their past aren't good stories. And so they feel lost. And so the first step, if you're feeling really depressed, down, and lost, and you've tried to find purpose and you can't, I think the problem is you're trying to purpose your way to happiness, and you have to deal with the meaning problem first, which is often therapy. And specifically something called narrative therapy, where you go back and you look at the traumas of your life, whether generational or lived, and you rewrite those stories in which, instead of being either a victim or the one who made a mistake, you were actually a good person in a bad situation. And so you rewrite that story and remove yourself from responsibility from the trauma. And you kind of forgive yourself and move on and realize that actually heroically you made it through this difficult thing. It's changing or rewriting that story. And so I think a lot of people are stuck where you're talking about. I can give you a million exercises of how to work on purpose. I can help you find these purpose anchors, and then we can build a life of purpose around it, what I call a climb or a series of climbs. None of that's particularly hard, but it is incrementally much harder if your sense of meaning is kind of that victim story. And so that's what I'd say. If you're feeling really lost and depressed and feeling like you can't find a sense of purpose, most likely it's because you're looking for purpose to save the day. And really, you need to go back and do some of that deeper work when it comes to meaning, and maybe get some professional help, actually.
So if you're taking stock of your current purpose code, see what I did there?
Nice.
But let's say you have a lifelong purpose that just hasn't been serving you. You're a great example, Doc G, where you probably thought that becoming a doctor was your life purpose for the longest time. And then you make this huge pivot, and all of a sudden, that is no longer your purpose. So how do you think about purpose pivots? Maybe you have a better phrase for it, but how do you think about like completely reshaping and redirecting your life if your purpose has changed?
Here's the great thing. There are no rules to purpose. It can be short-term or long-term. It can be something that you feel like outwardly changes the world or not. You can have one purpose or you can have multiple. There are no rules. The key is when you stop enjoying the process of doing that thing, it's time to move on. And I was a perfect example. You know, after my dad died, this identity and purpose around being a doctor really did serve me. Like, I was excited. I was engaged. Every day I would wake up early to study. I'd go to school. I always tell people, like, when I went to University of Michigan, a big football school, on Saturday mornings, everyone would be at the football game and I'd be at the law library because that was where I wanted to be studying. So this did serve a sense of purpose for me. I love the process of getting there. The problem was when I actually finally got there, I no longer like the process anymore. So I love the big audacious goals of saving lives or impacting the world. But the day-to-day didn't fill me up at all. And so I burnt out. And so I think it is incumbent on us to constantly be looking at the activities we fill our day with. And if they're not serving a sense of purpose, if we're not enjoying the process of doing them, it's time to recalculate and pivot. And so again, in my version of the world, you have a set amount of time on this earth and we have no idea how much there is. And you have no control over anything except what activities you do as time passes. So you have a bunch of tools and a bunch of levers at your disposal to make sure that you spend as much time doing purposeful, deeply interesting work during that time and getting rid of everything you loathe. And you should be recalculating that always. And when you're younger, there'll probably be a little bit more you loathe and a little bit less you like. But if you're thoughtful and intuitive and really think about this stuff, as time goes on, you're going to be getting rid of things you don't like, and you're going to be adding in things you do like, and rinse and repeat until you're living a life that's mostly only things you like, where you look at your calendar and everything on it is something you put there because you wanted to do it. And if you don't like it, you exit out. And so that's kind of that beautiful evolution I think we can all go through. And I mentioned that there are some tools and levers. So tools, we all get caught on money and we think that money is the only tool, but we have tons of other tools. We have our youth, our energy, our connections, our communities, et cetera, et cetera. So simple example, you're working 8 to 6, you hate your job, you're working Monday to Friday, you don't have enough money, you're like, I can't possibly find purpose until I make more money, but your parents live down the way. Could you move out of your apartment, live with your parents, pay half the rent or no rent? And could that save you enough money that maybe instead of working Monday through Friday, you work Monday through Thursday, and now you have an extra day to do purposeful things? So we have many more tools, not just money, but all sorts of other tools. And then I mentioned that not only do we have tools, but we have levers. Right? Our levers are the art of subtraction, the joy of addition, and substitution, right? So even if you're stuck monetarily and you're trying to use some of those tools, well, you know, if you're a young person and you hate your job and you need to do it to make ends meet, but you're not married, you don't have a mortgage, and you have a lot more energy at the age of 22 than I have at 51, you probably can add some purposeful activities on a Sunday morning and have enough energy and ability to do that. So without even changing your job, you've used the art of addition or the joy of addition to add something purposeful in your life. You're improving that calculus when you look at time passing. Or you could take your job and use the art of subtraction. Maybe you get rid of that thing at work you hate the most and offer to do something else. And if that doesn't work, maybe substitution. Maybe you change jobs. Maybe you change employers. Maybe you change bosses. We have all this agency and this capability, and we all should be winning the game. And winning the game looks like complete and utter control over your calendar. And so that's where we want to go.
Talking about, realizing that maybe the purpose that you thought you had is not the correct one, and changing gears, it makes me think about how probably the attribute in people that I dislike the most is someone who is like closed-minded and unwilling to change. I think it's because like I have such a curiosity and I love to learn to do things and how to do things. And to me, if you're actually someone who really likes to learn, you have to be open to change, because you're going to learn something that goes counterintuitive to what you already know, and it's going to drive you to change because that means you've found a better way of doing something. And as we think through purpose and what we want to do in life, I was thinking through the kind of conundrum of like a situation people could find themselves in where they're having trouble finding their purpose because they haven't experienced the thing yet. It's like if I ask, what is the most beautiful place in the world? Like, you only have this certain places that you can kind of pull from until you've seen every place in the world. What do you have any recommendations for people to, if they're struggling with finding that purpose, not to just like on the reflection piece and thinking of the things they've already tried or maybe they deep down know, but more on the experimentation side and like getting out there and discovering a broader aperture and maybe different initiatives and different things that is their true purpose that they just haven't even discovered yet?
So the thing about it is we really get stuck in a scarcity mindset when it comes to purpose. We all think, oh, there's this one true purpose, and we either find it and live a good life, or we don't find it and we lose. And the truth of the matter is, I think there's abundance. And so when I look at my life today, especially since I've embraced Little P Purpose, I have so many things to do and so many things on my list of possible Little P Purpose that I couldn't possibly do them all. I just have to pick 2 or 3, and then I push others to the side. And until I have an open space, I can't even deal with those. The way you find out that you love a lot of things, the way that you find out that there's tons of Little P Purpose in your mind is you have to open yourself up to the universe and see what there is. And, I'm not perfect, right? I tell people all the time, like, I don't necessarily love traveling. And a lot of people in the financial independence space, they love traveling. They talk about all their trips. And so sometimes I get invited to something, like to give a talk somewhere, and I'm like, oh, that's going somewhere I haven't been, or I'm going to have to go to the airport and then rent a car, and I'm going to do all these things that to me aren't my favorite. And so, for instance, I got invited to speak at the Slow-Fi retreat, which was just this weekend in New Hampshire at Lake Winnipesaukee. And so part of me, the minute I hear that, is like, oh, travel and got to take a plane, got to rent a car, and it's 2.5 hours away from the airport, blah, blah, blah. But the other side of that is that's like a new adventure where I may find something that could be really of interest and excitement to me. And so I go and I do this trip, and I fly into Boston and I rent a car, and I'm just driving through beautiful New Hampshire and going to this gorgeous place and meeting incredibly cool people and noticing pieces of nature that I don't normally connect with. And all of a sudden, there are like all these other possibilities of things that could be Little P Purpose for me, right? Like, I don't spend any time in New Hampshire. I never go to Vermont. I never do these kind of things. And so I think we have to let go of some of this fear. I think fear and scarcity are married. And I think we have to let go of fear and experience new things. And the worst comes to worst. You kind of do something and you're like, yeah, that's not it for me. And now for the next time, and you don't sign up for those kind of things. But if you happen to find something that really lights you up, it just creates more of that abundance, more of those possibilities, more things to fill your time with that help make you become the person you want to be.
Well, Doc G, as we start to bring this episode to a close, I think by the time this airs, the book will be available for order. Where do you want to send people? Where can people learn more about you, hear more from you, buy the book, do all that good stuff?
The easiest thing to do is go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you will find both my books, Taking Stock and The Purpose Code, as well as where to buy them. And all the other content I produce. The place I spend most of my time is at earnandinvest.com doing a podcast, but I also have a medical blog, a financial blog, and the Purpose Code Substack if you're interested in kind of hearing the latest and greatest about my philosophies about meaning, purpose, and happiness.
Well, Doc, thank you so much for giving us some time. And I'm glad you've got so many different avenues to get information out there because I never get tired of hearing your perspectives on things. I feel like I still had another hour worth of questions I would love to ask you. So love having you on the show. Thank you for giving us some time. It's always good to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.